In February 1916, the only clergyman to face capital punishment in America was executed for murdering and dismembering a pregnant woman. He was also a rapist and suspected serial killer. This is Finch's Murders and the Killer Priest. Hans Schmidt was born in the Bavarian town of Aschaffenburg in Germany in 1881 to a Protestant father and a Catholic mother. Unfortunately, there was a long history over the years of mental illness on both sides of the family, which impacted and blighted the boy's checkered upbringing, which must have affected him, as evidenced by some aspects of his behaviour. From an early age, he was regularly beaten by his father and had to endure the spectacle of watching his father frequently hit his mother in bouts of anger. Even in childhood, Schmidt combined a deep religious devotion with a fascination with drinking blood and dismembering animals. From contemporary accounts of relatives, he once beheaded 2 of his parents' geese and kept the severed heads in his pocket. Some days he also liked to walk to the village slaughterhouse, where he would watch the death and dissection of farm animals with gruesome fascination. In 1905, during his later seminary studies, Schmidt was arrested by the Bavarian police and charged with forging diplomas for failing students. Although the public prosecutor was determined to send Schmidt to prison, his father hired a lawyer who arranged for the charges to be dropped for reasons of mental impairment. Although many who knew him had serious doubts about his moral and mental fitness to serve as a Catholic priest, Schmidt claimed he was ordained into the priesthood by Bishop Kirstein of Mainz on December 23, 1904. In a later conversation with Manhattan doctors, he recalled,
"The bishop ordained me alone. I do not like to speak of it. The real ordination took place the night before. Saint Elizabeth, she ordained me herself. I was praying at my bedside when she appeared to me and said, 'I ordain you to the priesthood.' There was light during her appearance. I told no one. I thought it best to keep it to myself. They would make fun of me. They always made fun of me for these things. They always expect others to do as they do. God speaks to different people in different ways."
During his routine parish assignments in the villages of Bergel and Seligenstadt, it is said that Schmidt molested altar boys, had affairs with several women, and consorted with prostitutes. At the same time, his unconventional and creative way of saying Mass and eccentric sermons led to his parishioners and fellow priests to complain about him to the Monsignor and to the bishop. As soon as it became clear that no other parish assignments would be forthcoming in the diocese, in 1909 he decided to cut his losses and made the decision to emigrate to the United States and seek new opportunities. He was first sent to St. John's Roman Catholic Church in Louisville, Kentucky. Whilst he was there, a rift opened up between him and the senior pastor, for reasons not entirely clear, which resulted in Schmidt's transfer to St. Boniface Church in New York City. In 1912, Schmidt met Anna Aumiller, who was the housekeeper at the rectory of St. Boniface Church. She had emigrated from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1910. In one of his many conversations with doctors after his arrest, Schmidt claimed to have heard a voice from God, ordering him to love Anna. At first she refused his advances, but eventually began having an illicit and secret close relationship with the priest. At the beginning of December, Schmidt was also having a secret homosexual relationship with a New York City dentist named Ernest Murray, with whom he operated a counterfeiting ring. Schmidt, at a later interview, claimed to have enjoyed his time with Murray more than that of Anna. After his subsequent transfer to the Diocese of St. Joseph's Church in Haarlem, Schmidt and Anna continued their closely guarded secret relationship. It was later claimed that they were somehow married in a secret ceremony, which Schmidt performed himself. He also wrote their names on a marriage certificate and told Anna that he was about to leave the priesthood so that they could live together. It was later claimed that during a sexual encounter with Anna on the high altar of St. Joseph's Church, Schmidt received what he believed was a command from God to sacrifice her. The command was repeated so insistently that he told Anna, who called him crazy. Trouble began a few weeks later, when she got pregnant and told Schmidt. This was quite possibly for the second time, because it was suspected that she'd already had one abortion. This would have been incredibly scandalous for the young priest, and could have led him to being defrocked. So instead of just coming clean and hoping for the mercy of the Church, he decided to break one of its holiest commandments. On the night of September the 2nd, 1913, Schmidt went to the apartment they had rented while posing as a married couple. There, in a cold frame of mind, he slashed Anna's throat while she slept, drank her blood, raped her as she bled to death, and dismembered her body, throwing the pieces from a ferry into the Hudson River. He then calmly returned to St. Joseph's Church, performed Mass, and administered Holy Communion, as though nothing had happened. After pieces of Anna's torso washed up ashore at Cliffside Park and Weehawken in New Jersey, Hudson County Police detectives found a price tag still attached to the pillowcase used to wrap part of the body, whose identity was not known at this point. Using the tag, the pillowcase was traced to a factory in Newark, which sold exclusively to Manhattan furniture dealer George Sachs. The investigation was then taken over by the New York City Police Department and assigned to Manhattan Chief of Detectives Joseph Foro. After arriving at George Sachs' furniture store at 2782 8th Avenue, Inspector Foro found the dealer unable to recall how many of the pillowcases he had sold. A check through his receipts revealed that a bed, mattress, pillows and pillowcases had been sold on August the 26th. The buyer had given his name as A. Van Dyke and had arranged for his purchases to be delivered to a third-story apartment at 68 Broadhurst Avenue. Questions to the building superintendent by detectives revealed that the apartment was occupied by a married couple. The husband was described as a man with a heavy German accent, who had given his name as H. Schmidt. When a 3-day stakeout revealed no one arriving, Inspector Foro ordered detectives to break into the apartment. A cursory search found that the floor had been recently scrubbed, but large amounts of dried blood were found on the walls. A large blood-stained knife was also discovered on the kitchen shelf. Clothing with the name A. Van Dyke sewn into the lining was uncovered, as were letters in both German and English, addressed to Hans Schmidt. Many of the letters were from women in Germany. The largest number, however, were from an Anna Aumüller, whose most recent address was listed at 428 East 70th Street. Inspector Foro visited the address and learned that Anna had moved out after receiving a job as a housekeeper at Sir Boniface's church. Foro and detectives then visited the church and were told by the senior pastor, Father John Braun, that Anna had been his housekeeper but had transferred to St. Joseph's Church. On being asked if he knew the name Hans Schmidt, Father Braun described him as a priest who had formerly been assigned to St. Boniface's Church, but had also moved to St. Joseph's. Detectives arrived at St. Joseph's Rectory at 1:30 p.m. After Foro pounded on the door, the senior pastor, Father Daniel Quinn, had answered the knocking, and on hearing the reason that the police had called, led them to the parlour and went and fetched Schmidt. On being confronted by the inspector and the detectives, Schmidt admitted that he had killed Anna, claiming he had done so because he loved her. He then went on to describe the murder and dismemberment in minute detail. As his fellow priests watched in horror, Schmidt was arrested and taken away into police custody. A media feeding frenzy ensued as the New York papers competed against each other with an ever greater degree of sensationalism regarding the case. Following the priest's arrest, the Archdiocese of New York announced that Father Schmidt's priestly faculties had been indefinitely suspended. During the first trial, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His defence team accordingly used Schmidt's bisexuality and claims of hearing voices as proof of their client's psychosis. The defence also demonstrated that mental illness ran in Schmidt's family. They called a psychologist named Eli Jelliff, who testified that Schmidt's family tree showed up to 60 near or distant relatives who displayed signs of mental instability, and, therefore, Schmidt should be spared the death penalty because he too was insane. In rebuttal, the prosecution called in other witnesses, including multiple medical experts who had questioned Schmidt before the trial. They had concluded, despite the defendant's allegations about hearing voices telling him to sacrifice the victim, that Father Schmidt was completely sane. In the end, the prosecution's efforts were in vain. At the conclusion of the trial in December 1913, a hung jury was declared, and as a result, the judge ordered a rehearing with a different jury. The second trial started 2 weeks later. This time, the prosecution introduced new testimony. In April, well before the defendant received his alleged command from God to sacrifice Anna, Schmidt had convinced a fellow German immigrant, a woman named Bertha Zeck, to pose as Anna Almüller and to purchase a $5,000 life insurance policy in her name. The policy listed Father Schmidt as the sole beneficiary. On February 5, 1914, after only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Father Schmidt guilty of first-degree murder. After being sentenced to the death penalty, the condemned man said he was satisfied with the verdict and would rather die today rather than tomorrow. He was remanded to Sing Sing prison in upstate New York to await his eventual execution. Schmidt's defense team filed an appeal shortly after his sentence, which postponed his execution for at least a year while it worked its way through the courts. In December 1914, Schmidt admitted that he feigned insanity during his trials. In admitting so, he accused the dentist with whom he had a homosexual affair, Ernest Murray, of having accidentally killed Anna during a botched abortion. He further claimed that he had allowed the authorities to pursue him for the murder rather than Dr. Murray because he wanted to cover for his male lover. Due in large part to both Murray and Bertha Zeck's insistence to the contrary, Schmidt's new allegations proved to be completely unsuccessful in getting him a new trial. On February 18, 1916, Schmidt entered the prison death chamber at 5:50 a.m. Moments before being seated in the electric chair, he said,
"I want to say one word before I go. I beg forgiveness of all I have offended or scandalized, and I forgive all who have offended against me."
Before the switch was thrown, Schmidt said in a muffled voice,
"My last word is to say goodbye to my dear old mother."
The first jolt of electricity was initiated at 5:52 a.m. After 2 additional jolts were administered, the prison doctor pronounced death at 5:58 in the morning. A reporter from the Albany Times later wrote that Schmidt's last night on earth was spent proclaiming his innocence and declaring that he had made peace with God. The guards had expected a scene when the prisoner was to be executed, but his actions surprised them. He was the calmest man in the death chamber, as he almost domineered those who assisted in putting him to death. The Schmidt family originally intended to ship the body home for interment in Germany, but due to the ongoing nature of World War I, this idea proved impossible. As a result, Father William Cashin, the Roman Catholic prison chaplain, arranged for burial in New York State. At the request of the family in Germany, the location of his burial was to be kept secret. Were there also possible crimes committed? Apart from killing his young pregnant so-called wife, further police investigations revealed that Schmidt had a second apartment where he had set up a sophisticated counterfeiting workshop. The authorities also suspected him of as many as 4 other murders. He had been seen with a woman named Helen Green. She had left for Chicago the month before Anna's murder, but had then subsequently disappeared completely. Police couldn't find any traces of her. When the priest had moved to America, he was seen around the city with another woman, whom he had claimed was his wife. She also had mysteriously disappeared. He was also suspected in the deaths of 2 children. The owner of the apartment complex where Schmidt was living said he sometimes brought a 5-year-old boy to his living room. Schmidt had claimed the boy was his son. That boy had since disappeared, again without any trace. When the owner had asked the boy for his name, he said it was August van Dyke. Schmidt became an alternative suspect in the murder of Alma Kellner, aged 9, whose body was found buried in the basement of St. John's Church in Louisville, Kentucky, where he had worked. The body had been burned, but authorities suspected the killer had tried to dismember her. The caretaker, Joseph Wendling, was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder, based on circumstantial evidence and blood on some clothing found at his house. At the request of Alma's uncle, Wendling was subsequently pardoned some time later and deported to his home country of France in 1935.